If you're struggling with your vitality, energy, mood, focus, or sleep, this podcast is for you. Your host, Dr. Tsung, ER doctor and aerospace flight surgeon, will help you reach for the stars and remove the barriers or blockades that have been holding you back from living your best life. If you've been challenged by your health, relationships, or productivity, then it's time for a breakthrough. So here's your host, Dr. Tsung.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Tsung, and welcome to It's Not Rocket Science Show. Today, we have the honor of our guest, Kevin Palmieri. He is the founder, CFO, and host of Next Level University. And it's a university that you can go if you want to up-level love, wealth, health, and life. And there are like 1,000+ episodes on his podcast, and it's just a wealth of knowledge. So I'm really, really excited to bring Kevin on. We're going to be talking a lot about self-awareness or hyperconsciousness. It's going to be what's going to make you accelerate that your own life in terms of like elevating your EQ and how to deal with other people, creating deep relationships, and just being aware what your thought processes are. So again, Kevin, thank you so much for being here. Please, would you mind giving us an introduction about what you do and why you do what you do, your journey up to this point?
Yes. So number one, thank you so much for having me. Number two, thank you for the introduction. I'm very excited to chat with you today. And so, yes, I am Kevin Palmieri. I am a podcaster first. That is what I consider myself. That is what I identify as. I am a podcaster and I love podcasting, but it all started from a place of service. I believe at a deep level that if there is more self-improvement in the world will improve. I just have a deep belief. And the reason I started all this was because I believe if I had self-improvement in my life earlier, things would have ended up a little bit different. So just for context, Anne, I always say I was raised in a single parent household. So I was raised by my mom and my grandmother, and I didn't meet my dad until I was 27. And that obviously plays a large role in a young man's life. And I do believe it put a chip on my shoulder, which has helped me succeed. So I'm grateful for that. But now I am running the chip. The chip is not running me, which was an important piece that I figured out eventually. If you were to look at me in my mid-20s, you would see somebody who looked super successful, somebody who had a high-paying job. I had just won a bodybuilding show, somebody who had a beautiful girlfriend. I had a new apartment. I had a sports car. I had all those things that people think that they want, and I definitely thought that I wanted. But the truth of it is I was very insecure. I was very scarce. I was not confident. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. I was not purposeful. And eventually it got to the point where my girlfriend left me. When she left me, because I was so insecure, I was depressed, I was anxious, I was just a shell of myself, I said, you know what? I need to go make a boatload of money. Because if I make more money, all these other problems are going to go away. So I then dedicated the next year of my life to my job consistently. And my job at the time was in the weatherization industry. So we would go into buildings and we would make them more energy efficient. Since I worked for the state and we worked on state buildings, I was making $60 to $120 an hour, which is great. I was traveling all over the place because most of our contracts were on the road. And if you fast forward to the end of that year, I had been on the road for 10 months out of the 12 months. Every single week, it was brutal. But I ended up making $100,000 and that was my goal. So I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. And I had another one of those moments where externally, it looked like I was crushing it. It looked like I was living the dream. Internally, I was very unhappy with everything I had going on. And I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously. I'm just showing up, hoping for the best, and I'm not really planning anything out. There's no strategy to what I'm doing. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious. So I started a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And that is where this journey of self-improvement and growth really, really started for me. Now, I had this podcast and I fell in love with that. I fell out of love with my job. I didn't want to travel anymore. I didn't care about the money. It got to the point where I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be my own boss. And I wanted to do something that I felt really, really mattered. By the end of that next year, I was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed debating suicide because I felt so stuck. I felt so trapped. I felt so helpless. I felt so hopeless. I was just in a very, very dark place. Luckily, my friend and now business partner was there to support me via text message and really help me level set and figure out, yeah, we're in a dark place right now, but that's not where we have to be forever. And a change of environment would probably be beneficial. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later and going full time into what we're doing today, being a very broke entrepreneur for a long period of time. But here we are 5 years later and everything looks successful. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
That's amazing. I can actually identify with it quite a bit because I came from a single mother household as well. I've never met my dad. I still haven't met my dad, actually. They were divorced when I was a baby. And I think my mom had always just taught me to be independent, to never depend on anyone. And I needed to succeed because of my mom. She was the only one that I was the only one that she had, essentially, right? And it's funny. My goal back then when we were poor, I was like, if I could just make $100,000, then everything will be okay. We wouldn't have to be like this. We would be so happy. And so that was my goal back then. And I reached it during residency. And then when I finished, like towards the tail end of residency, which had been my goal my whole life, societal definition of success. And I realized I wasn't happy, actually. And it was through a couch surfer that I hosted for the very first time ever. A couch surfer came and talked about Tony Robbins and talked about Tim Ferriss. That was the first time I heard about their names, and which led to my journey, the beginning of my journey, which is around 26, 27. So I can resonate quite a bit with what you're saying. It's very similar.
26 and 27. That's a very interesting year. That my business partner had a car accident at 26, shifted his life. It's like, we had quarter life crises instead of later in life, which I'm very, very grateful for, because a lot of people have midlife crises and it's hard to start over that time in life. So I'm grateful, and I'm grateful you found this and you're doing something that you love now.
Yeah, I agree. And what do you think is the vision that you have right now? Like, first of all, tell us your why for a next level university, to go in a little bit in depth on that, and kind of where do you see this going? And for people who come to next level university to learn what you guys talk about, what can they actually achieve? What is their end vision that their life could be like?
Yeah. So the why is very, very simple. We realize that a lot of people that can't necessarily afford or access self-improvement would benefit from it greatly. There's a lot of people out there that want to get better. They just don't necessarily have the funds or the means. So we do an episode every single day. We do 7 episodes a week. And our motto is self-improvement in your pocket every single day from anywhere on the planet, completely free. So we are showing up every day and we are giving it our absolute best to add value. And one of the other interesting whys for me, Anne, as a tattooed bodybuilder who loves mixed martial arts and all things fighting, you might not guess that most of our listeners are actually women. One of the upsides of having that demographic is I've learned so much about vulnerability, about communication, emotional intelligence. I've just learned more about somebody that I didn't necessarily know. But the other part of that, and the potentially heavier part of that, is I have heard so many horror stories of the way that these women have been treated, whether it's mental, physical, emotional abuse, that type of stuff. The deep part of my why is I want to be somebody who can help people, but do it without ego. I don't want people to connect self-improvement is ego, because I think there's a lot of that out there. I just want to be a positive male role model who shows people that you can be vulnerable and you can be authentic and you can be transparent and you can still get to the next level of your life. So those are a couple of the ultimate whys. What I'm thinking about when I think, what can somebody get? And why should somebody do something that gets them to the next level? Our focus is level up your life, level up your love, level up your health, and level up your wealth. There's a lot of places you can go to learn about business, but is that going to be at the cost of your relationship? There's a lot of places you can learn about making money, but is that going to help you physically? At NLU, we're all about holistic. So I want you to be able to pour into each bucket at the same time and grow everything together. Is it harder? Absolutely. But you can expect to have a more fulfilling relationship. You can expect to have more confidence, a deeper understanding of money, a deeper understanding of yourself, and therefore more potential to get the life of your dreams. That's ultimately what we're playing for. And in the long run, we want to have the most successful self-improvement brand in the world. That's really the end goal vision. That's why we do the things the way we do it. And I am terrified and overwhelmed, but I've signed up for it and I'm ready for it.
And what is that going to look like for you personally after you reach that end goal and maybe for your family?
The ultimate thought that I have when I get asked that is it's going to be an exponential version of what I'm doing now. So this year I did 365 episodes of our show. I started another podcast and I think I was a guest on 400. So I did close to 800 shows this year. That is what I'm aiming for in the future. I want to be out doing this for 8 to 10 hours a day. That's as far as my vision has gotten. Now, obviously, we'll be speaking, we'll have a lot of clients, and there'll be financial freedom, but I want to be able to impact as many people as humanly possible. I will spend more time in the office. The office will get nicer. The camera will get nicer. The microphone will get nicer, but I'm living my purpose. And I don't see much of that changing, honestly. And I'm grateful for that. I understand having that level of clarity is rare and definitely a blessing. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
Yeah, I love it. And the reason, the audience, the reason why we talk about the why so much is because without knowing your why, you want to be pulled towards your purpose, not pushed. Like you have to do this. So never forced, essentially. And that's the reason why we talk about why so much, and the reason why we start with why so much, so that you guys can identify with Kevin, to understand where he's coming from. And if that resonates with you, then you can keep going and check him out on his website, his podcast, and learn a little bit more. You'll be more inclined to take in the suggestions that he gives you during his podcast if you understand where he's coming from. And so tell us, why is self-awareness or hyperconsciousness so important out of everything that you have talked about?
Yeah, I think at the deepest level, the more you understand yourself, the more you understand the world, and the more you understand everything else. So at the end of the day, we have a lot of conversations, but the conversation we have most often is with ourselves. And oftentimes those conversations are us trying to figure out what is going on in the brain of ourselves. I think self-awareness is so important because it quite literally alters the lens through which you see the world. So the example, we were talking about this before, Ann, I remember I was at the gym with a business partner and a friend of ours. In the gym, I am very, very confident. 10 out of 10 confident. I've spent 16 years in the gym. Confidence and competence are connected, right? So I feel really good there. The second we switched over from fitness to talking about business, I get super insecure. And I started to get an ego, and I started to villainize my business partner and our other friend. And I kept thinking, I was like, what is going on here? My mood just went from super happy and abundant to combative and ego driven. What is going on here? And I sat with that and I kept digging, and I said, oh, you know what? I feel insecure. I feel insecure that I just went from being the leader to being the back of the pack. I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know how to add value here. I need to check in with that. So why am I villainizing them? Because I don't feel good enough, and I'm not ready to see that. I'm not ready to become aware of that. So I sat with that. In real time, I was able to say, okay, this isn't a them problem. They're not making you feel any type of way. You're just insecure right now. Let's just recluse a little bit. We don't have to be the center of attention. Let's see what we can take in, and let's use this as a learning experience. Now, if I didn't have self-awareness in that moment, that could have put a crack in our relationship. I might look at my business partner and or our friend differently. Oh, they have an ego because they're so confident, or whatever it may be. That would alter the way that I saw things, and it would alter the way that I saw things in a negative way potentially. So yeah, I think self-awareness is so important, because if you don't understand how you're viewing things and why you're viewing things, you don't really know if what you're viewing is correct. And that throws everything off in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I can kind of relate with my spouse and I after we had the baby. There's a lot of times when you're not aware or not as conscious, then you're victimizing or you're blaming a lot of times. And you don't realize it's actually because you feel hurt, you feel unheard, or you feel insecure, etc. And so if you don't recognize, like you said, if you don't recognize your thought process, or another word is metacognition, thinking about your own thoughts, then your relationships could degrade around you. Probably will have negative self-talk too at the same time, or not. You may have anger to deal with it, to cope with that, to hide behind anger, but actually you're sad and insecure. So yeah, I don't know if you have any sort of strategies or tactics. Number one, how do I know I'm not as conscious? Or what is a person like where they're unconscious or not self-aware? And what are some questions they can ask to get there?
One of my favorite questions ever is why. I know it sounds overly simplistic, but when you ask why, you're forced to search for an answer that forces you to dig to the next layer. That's a great question. A great tactic is, when you're going to do something, try to predict the outcome. So just as an example, say you're going to the store, try to predict the outcome. Okay, I'm going to go to the store. There's not going to be that many people. It's Tuesday at 9 a.m. I don't expect there'll be that many people. After you do something, you do an experience review. And you look back at your prediction, and then you say, okay, was I right? Was I optimal? Was I wrong? And why? What that's going to force you to do is it's going to force you to find awareness. I think one of the reasons and one of the ways to tell how aware you are is to say, how often do I reflect on what has happened to me and what new pieces of information do I take from that? So it's one of those things where when I say I was living unconsciously, I wasn't reflecting on anything. If I was reflecting, I never would have got to the point where I traded in a year of my life for $100,000. I probably would have saw that pattern earlier. If you're the type of person who does a lot of things and you have a lot of new experiences and you are out there trying different things, I would guess that you probably have a fairly high level of self-awareness as long as you're reflecting on the things that you're doing. So I would say the simplest question to ask is why? Why do I feel comfortable in this moment? Why do I feel uncomfortable in this moment? If I had to come up with an answer, what would I pick at? All right, let me start there. And then I think the practice is having some sort of experience review where after this, I'll say, how did that interview go? Did it go as well as I expected? Yes. Okay, why? And I felt really, really safe. And Ann and I connected before, and great sense of humor and similar story, great rapport. Did it not go as well as I expected? Okay, why? Did Ann have an ego? No. Was I insecure? Right? And then you just go through. So it's almost like you're able to operate in your program by understanding the program. And then it allows you to go deeper and deeper.
Yeah, essentially you can detach and be very objective about the scenario and think about the various reasons why. So like an extreme, I can relate because I went through 40 years of Zen. It's a 5-day sort of meditation or session where you're in a pod, you're hooked up to EEG. And literally for 5 days, you're thinking about any event, significant events in your life, or really, it doesn't have to be significant, just any event in your life that caused you resistance. So any feeling of sadness, shame, anger, just feeling unwell, and really going into finding the gift and why it happened the way it happened and why did you feel that way. So as an example, like I always wanted to get things done. I'm like type A and I wanted to if you look on this side, it's like all my certificates from all my fellowships and residency. And if I make a mistake on a question, a test, or maybe during rounds when a consultant tells me that I did something wrong, I took it a lot harder back then because I realized it took a lot of whys, but I realized my self-worth was based on my knowledge. And you can never have enough knowledge in the world. You will never know enough to know all the answers. And if your self-worth is based on how much you know, then, I was screwed. And it took a lot of whys to even get there. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. It's a challenge. It really, you have to be committed to the long haul because the thing about self-awareness is it compounds, right? When you become self-aware at level 1, you're able to see level 2. And then when you can see level 2, you can kind of see level 4 a little bit. And then you keep digging and keep digging. Eventually you get to the point where it's like, oh my God, what a breakthrough. My self-worth is dependent on my outcomes. Okay, where does that show up in my life right now? Where did that start? And then why? So it's almost a train that when you start, it gets a little bit easier to unravel, but in a weird way, the awarenesses can also get more painful as you dig deeper. So it's an interesting journey. I would say it is one that is definitely worth it, though, in the long run.
What has hyperconsciousness provided for you?
I would say confidence. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think a lot of people see me and assume I am a confident extrovert who loves being the center of attention when none of that is true at all. It's allowed me to say, okay, I am really afraid of what I'm going to do, but that doesn't mean I don't do it. It just means that I'm going to have to walk myself through the process. I'll be very honest. I am intimidated by you, Ann. I am intimidated by you. I just am. I can tell that you've done a lot of work on yourself and it's very inspiring, but it's intimidating. Allowing me to look within during this interview and say, everything's fine. It's not a big deal. Ann's a great human. You've done this podcast thing 2,000 times or whatever it is. You've done it a lot. You're going to be fine. That's what hyperconsciousness has helped me with. It's helped me be present in moments where I feel like just disassociating and leaving the room completely. It's allowed me to be present when I'm uncomfortable. And I think that's a unique superpower that you can have, that you'll do things you never would have done. And you'll get results that you never would have gotten as long as you can hang through it. That's what I would say.
That's awesome. And I would say that I was thinking that you have done like thousands of episodes and been this so many years. And I'm just like, oh my God, I want to just pick your brain. So the feeling is mutual. And I think another word for that is perhaps like authenticity. Would you say? Like you're not afraid to be your authentic self. And this is who we are. And the listeners, if you catch any part of this that feels like it resonates with you, great. If it just changes 2 millimeters for you so that you can have an exponentially different trajectory, great. But if this is not your jam, then switch off, go to another episode or go to another podcast. That is okay. We are okay with that because we have our strong whys. We know ourselves, what we stand for. We have our boundaries and we know our triggers too, as well. And we control it in your emotions that way. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah. I think another benefit of hyperconsciousness, and you just spoke to this, it's the fact that the understanding that not everybody is going to like you. That is layer one. Layer two, some people will not like you because they don't want to like you. That's layer two. Layer three, some people will not like you because you are a mirror for the things that they don't like about themselves, right? And it keeps going. It gets to the point eventually where you say, you know what? Some people just are never going to like me, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't like myself. It doesn't mean I'm necessarily doing anything wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm not having a great impact on the world. It allows you to really see what's real. And when you see what's real, you stop telling yourself stories that don't serve you anymore. Or at least you have the ability to break free of those stories and break free of various emotions that you don't need to have. Yes, to your point, I would agree 100%.
Yeah, you place a lot of meanings on various events, create your own stories. And really the first thing to ask is, really, is it true? Like, nobody likes me. I'm stupid. Really? Is that true? Is it really true or not? And I'm curious, like, first, we can like maybe talk about several scenarios. Like, what do you do when somebody gives you a bad comment, bad review, or on YouTube, podcasts, social media? What do you do? And what's your thought process?
I'll be very honest. My initial thought is I would like to physically challenge that person to a duel. That is the first thing I do is like, all right, let's figure it out with our hands. And again, this is definitely something I've worked on a lot. I usually tend to reflect on what does that mean for us? So we got a review one time and this hurt my soul. This person said, Kev, I cannot stand when you start the podcast, you scream into the microphone and I have to turn it down. And it was like a 1-star review. Initially, my ego was like, I'm a professional podcaster. You don't know what you're talking about. Then I got that feedback from somebody else, somebody close to me, and I value their opinion. I changed the intro after that. So that was actually constructive, but it hurt my ego in the beginning. I've also gotten comments where you mentioned Tony Robbins earlier. Somebody wrote something like, oh, this kid thinks he's Tony Robbins, get a job, be productive, and do something with your life. And the way I respond to something like that now, after my ego goes away, is I understand that's probably a pretty unfulfilled person who is looking for attention, has very little control in their life, and is looking to control other people's lives through fear, through pain, through negative comments. I try to empathize now. And again, it's easier said than done. And I still get frustrated and I get angry, but I try to empathize with the fact that I've never taken time out of my day to go comment something negative on somebody's post. But I can understand if you are struggling and you see somebody who's doing well, it's probably triggering. And I try to empathize with that. So it all depends really on the situation, Ann. But I would say, number one, I try to say, you know what? Is there any constructive pieces I can take out? Number two, if I could put myself into this person's shoes, would I be? And would I understand the way that they feel right now?
Yeah, I think I would say, wow, you're being compared to Tony Robbins. That's amazing that you're doing the right thing. Like,
Thank you.
Okay.
That's a good reframe right there. I like that.
Because essentially I had like a similar comment like on YouTube. I think it was something like, you don't know what you're talking about, you're fake. And I was like, oh my God, I'm reaching enough audience. Well, at first I was like, I'm not fake. I'm fully authentic. Oh my God, come on. But then the next second was like, oh my God, I'm reaching enough audiences for people to have negative comments on my videos. This is like way better than before. Right. So this is actually progress from before. And I was like really happy and celebrating and forgot about it. So yes, that's what self-awareness can do for you. And that same applies to if you have a negative comment, perhaps from work or maybe like a spouse or maybe children. I'm curious, do you have any cases you can share with us on hyperconsciousness, how to deal with, say, personal relationships or business or maybe in the fitness or health?
I talk a lot about how that plays into relationships because so if you have a significant other, say you're in a relationship, your partner is somebody that you're going to communicate with very, very often. And the people that you communicate the most often with are going to see the different states that you have. So when I leave the office today after a long day, my wife is going to get a certain version of me that Anne doesn't get because I'm here to serve and this is me and I'm shining and I'm the guest and all that happy jazz. At some point, I'm going to have to do the dishes tonight. And that's going to be a different state that I'm in. So one of the things that I always suggest for people, and this has served me very, very well, never say the first thing that comes to mind. I like to play a little game called pinball. All pinball is when you are in a conversation with somebody, particularly a partner, when you get triggered, you let the thought that you want to say bounce around your head for a little bit and you let it knock off some of the dust, some of the stuff that's ego, some of the stuff that's meant to hurt, some of the stuff that's meant to get back at that person, and you let it bounce around for a little bit. And this is the reason why. There was a conversation my wife and I had one time where we were hosting this event and she said, "Hey, how many people are coming to the event?" And I said, the first thing that came to my mind, I said, I don't know. I know we have a lot of tickets sold. I don't know. I don't know how many people are coming, but there's going to be a lot of people. When in reality, I lied. And the reason I lied is because I didn't let it bounce around my head and get to the point where I knocked off the ego, I knocked off the scarcity, I knocked off the fear and said, honestly, we've only sold like 2 tickets. We've only sold like 2 tickets. And honestly, I'm pretty scared. I think this is going to go off the rails and I think we might lose money on this. I didn't pinball. I just said the first thing that comes to mind. Now that's an example of maybe a vulnerable share. There was another time when my business partner and I were on the team call. We have a 16-person team and we were having this conversation and egos were lifted for some reason. I think we were both tired, overwhelmed, stressed out. And my business partner and I were talking about a friend of ours. And I had been in this person's book. So this person reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to do a Q&A segment in my book with me." And I was like, cool. Am I famous? This is wild. I never expected this. My business partner was talking about this person's book. And I was triggered. And I said, "Alan, you didn't even read the effing book. I was in the book." Ego, all ego, all ego. If I would have let that pinball around and I would have gone to what we talked about earlier, I would have realized that I was insecure in that moment. I didn't feel like I was being heard. I didn't feel like I was being appreciated. And I felt like I was being a little bit under-respected. If I pinballed that around, I could have said that instead of, "Alan, you didn't even read the effing book." So that's just a couple examples of pinball. And again, that's hyperconsciousness. You're practicing self-awareness. In moments like this, sometimes I say blank. Okay, let me hold on to the thought a little bit longer. Let me see what falls off. And then I can share more of my authentic, balanced truth.
A lot of times I've tried to pinball. I'm still pinballing whenever after we had our son. In the past 6 months, all of a sudden our lives changed. And my husband and I, we have like different roles and responsibilities. So there are a lot of times where there are some things that I wanted to say, like, and a lot of times probably like, "Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you put up the milk bottle after you finish this? I mean, can't you just do the laundry? And if I'm doing this and this," but it has to be rephrased, like pinballed around, rephrased to, "Would you be willing to do this and this for us? Yeah. Would you have time to do this and this because of your work, etc." So I can really relate to that. The first words that come out of your mouth or the sentence is usually the emotional part.
Yeah. It's usually not the good stuff. The good stuff usually doesn't come out first. And then when you start catching yourself, you'll see patterns. So my schedule is pretty packed nowadays, which I'm grateful for, but it also creates a lot of scarcity around time for me. So I'll go out and I'll hug my wife and kiss my wife in between calls and she's working. And sometimes she'll say, "Hey, can you do this for me quick?" My natural tendency, if I do not pinball, is no, I don't have time. Every time I'll say it. Then I literally was talking to one of our cats because I'm weird like that. And I said, "Ace, Daddy has time. It's not a big deal. It's going to take 2 minutes. Daddy's going to do this." And then my wife brought me in this wonderful, cute note after about how I was flexible throughout the day. So that's because of pinball. That's what it is.
Yeah. We say that we do this for our family, for our loved ones, right? And Why are we so wrapped up in our work that we can't even give 2 minutes or 10 minutes to our loved ones at our best selves, right? Yeah. Very similar thing. I love being productive in the morning. I had a morning routine, try to finish all the top 3 things by 8. And then when my husband wakes up and wants to walk the dog, most often before there was a change, an emotional push that made me change. But before I was like, no, I got to finish this. And I would get annoyed because I was like, I'm on flow. I want to finish this. And then I realized that if I say I'm not being authentic, if I say I'm doing this for my husband to spend time with them to achieve financial freedom, and I can't even give 10 minutes to walk the dog with him, that's inauthentic, right? Yeah. So I wanted to recap because we did talk about a lot. So number one thing to be hyper-consciousness or hyper-aware is, again, to start with why, right? Ask whys in multiple levels. And that number 2 is to kind of don't be reactive on the first thing or your first automatic response then when somebody asks you a question. Instead, just let that thought go around in your head a little bit and to tell yourself, why am I thinking this thought? What needs are not being met? A lot of times I've also heard in terms of nonviolent communication, labeling your feelings. When you do this, I feel this. Would you be willing to do this? When you do a certain thing, I feel unheard. Would you be willing to actually help me do this and this? What are your thoughts about that? Does that play into? Yeah,
100%. 100%. Even just the word choice, right? Feeling is a lot different than accusing. I could accuse somebody of making me feel a certain way, but when I say sometimes I feel this way, I'm not saying that you're doing anything. I'm just saying from my perspective, this is what I see and this is how it's interpreted to me. I think it's a much better way and it de-escalates. It de-escalates. There's not blame. There's not shame. Yes, 100%. 100% agree.
Yeah. And when you ask somebody, would you be willing to see, you yourself have to be open as well, seeing their point of view, but would you be willing to, instead of you have to, or why don't you just do this for me because I did this for you? That's transactional. And would you be willing to, it's actually a choice for the other person.
Yeah. Or do you think it would be better for us if we that? I like that. Do you think it would be more beneficial for us if we? It just make it easy to get a yes. Right? If you frame a question in a positive manner where it's suggested growth, it's a lot easier than if somebody has to say, well, it's my fault. Okay, now we'll do something about it. It just makes it easier. And again, it's all the words that you choose. The words that you choose are very important and very impactful.
Yeah, it's a united front. So you avoid the use and use more of the we and us. And a lot of times when people are arguing, especially couples, that you lose sight of what's actually the intention. Right. A lot of times my husband and I have discussions around our child about little things but he likes it this way. I like bottle washing this way. But really, our intention is for the health of Kai. So how can we meet in the middle? So a lot of times we're arguing little things, but really we need to focus on the true intention.
Yeah. You're a team. My wife and I say all the time, hey, I understand we're running different plays right now, but just remember, we're a team. Let's reunite. We're a team. We're in this together. I always say that.
Yeah, united front. That's what we say. United front. Front. We're not being united front right now. What's going on? That's awesome. That's awesome.
We're very similar, you and I.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think after you're exposed to many similar, self-improvement items, and I think towards the end, it just gets ingrained in our brains. And what Kevin's talking about, hyperconsciousness, it's probably taking many, many years. It's taken me many years since age 27. I mean, it's almost 10 years. So for the audience, this is not going to happen day one after this. And I want you to realize the impact that this can have on you. If you're unconscious and just being reactive through life, then you're not in control of your identity of your life. But if you're hyperconscious, you start asking more questions about why you feel the way you feel, what your values are, then you can actually break through to your full authenticity and actually draw boundaries, which is super important as well to what matters, right?
Yeah, I said 2022 is the year of boundaries. It is the year of boundaries. 2023 will be as well.
Do you have anything in terms of hyper awareness or hyper consciousness of, say, in the health aspect, because I know you're into fitness and health, or perhaps in more of a business relationship as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with business because your awareness can only be as high as what you've studied with business. So that's a real challenge. But I don't know. I think one of the biggest things, no matter what the arena is to increase the inputs. And I think it goes with anything. when you increase the inputs, you increase the potential for perspective. And all I mean by that is when you listen to a podcast, you hear new ideas that you've never heard before. One thing you might say is, wow, I've never thought like that. Awesome. That's great. That's perspective. Another thing you might say is, wow, that's exactly how I think. Great. That's perspective. Another thing you might say is, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Okay, cool. That's also perspective. So whether it's fitness, whether it's finance, whether it's family, whether it's nutrition, whether it's hydration, sleep, the more content you consume, and obviously you have to be careful with what you consume, but the more content you consume, the more perspective you'll have. I think that will naturally help you become more aware because you're filling your mind with more things to choose through. And you can say yes and say no, but I think as human beings, it's important for us to understand where the ceiling is and where the floor is. The ceiling is the best in the world. The floor essentially is the worst in the world. Where do you fall? That right there is a piece of awareness. And then what do you do with that? So I don't necessarily have anything specific for business or health. I do think when I am having an injury, right, for the longest time, my shoulder was broken and I couldn't even put it behind my back. What did I do? I started consuming a ton of physical therapy content. Not all about shoulders either, about everything. What happened? My shoulder got better. And then I worked on it and then it got better. And then I started to understand, interesting, because I thought it was my shoulder, it actually might have been a different muscle in my body, just say my chest, that was creating that. Does my knee injury actually have to do with my knee or could it be my ankle? Oh, it's my ankle. My ankle's too tight. Okay, cool. So one piece of awareness gets carried over to other things, but it was just based on curiosity. So when you're curious, I think your awareness will raise because you're going to learn more naturally.
Yeah. And I think it ties in very well to when people are not aware, it's because they have blind spots. And so essentially you're making assumptions. And what you do is that you just ask more questions. You become curious, you consume content, or you ask for feedback. Say if you receive a poor review, that you are, number one, don't even wait until you receive a poor feedback from your employer. You would proactively ask for feedback every month or every 3 months, okay? So that you understand that it's not too late. So people are making up stories just because they're assuming like this person doesn't like me or I'm stupid or I can't do this or this isn't my shoulder and da, 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 da. When you understand and get all of the knowledge around it, and I think then you can kind of go back and backtrack to figure out why you thought the way you did before and why it's changed now. Does that sound similar to your process?
Yeah, it's ultimately you're trying to get to the truth. Really, I mean, that's what it is. The truth of the matter is that person doesn't hate you. The truth of the matter is, yeah, you probably had an unproductive month at work and you're going to get that feedback. What you're really doing, and you said the word is feedback. Everything that we receive is potential feedback based on our current awareness. So you might listen to an episode and say, wow, I've never thought that way. Okay, I'm not nearly as far as I thought. It helps you get to the truth. Awareness helps you get to the truth because you'll remove your ego and you'll say, okay, yep. That person that left that review that said I scream into the microphone, they were actually right based on the other truth that I received. Let me make changes with that. Yes, I agree 100%.
And do you have any routines or experiences that you've gone through, any books, websites that you've gone through that has helped you to ask more questions about why?
Simon Sinek has a great book called Start With Why, I believe is the title of it. That's a great one. Oh my goodness. There is a book and it is framed from an old man talking to a young man. I don't remember the name of the book.
You can send it to me after.
I will. It's a really introspective book where it forces you to think. It's very, very deep. I will send it after. And maybe we can throw it in the show notes. And I'll be honest, I've transitioned a lot of my learning from this type of learning to more business, to more podcasting, to more numbers, to more finance, just because that's the needs of the business now. But in the beginning, I was consuming a lot of content. The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer is a good book that makes you dig really deep, but it's not necessarily pragmatic. So it depends on what you're looking for.
Okay. Well, we will definitely have those in the show notes for you. And since I am all about also efficiency, productivity, peak performance, we talked about fulfillment a lot. I am curious to know your routine in terms of how you keep everything balanced, how you protect your time, how you get the maximal efficiency out of your day. Do you have anything that has been the 1-80-20 tactic that you use?
For me, it's getting up early. I am a superhero when I can get up at 4 a.m. because I get more done in that 4 hours than I do the rest of the day. So understanding whether or not you're a morning person or a night person is super important. Just because I get up at 4 doesn't mean you should. I don't like working at night. So for me, I get up at 4:30. I literally get into my gym clothes and I'm in my car by 4:45. On the way to the gym, I habit stack and I listen to whatever book I'm learning. I foam roll every single day I'm at the gym and do mobility while I'm learning. Then I exercise for 45 minutes. The second I'm done exercising, I put on our podcast to review our podcast, 15-minute ride home. And then from there, I get ready for the day and I am then in the office from 6 a.m. until 9 p.m. So the first third of my day is completely for me. That's for me to get grounded. That's for me to knock stuff out. And then from 9 till 6, I am front facing. You cannot get a hold of me before 9 a.m. You cannot schedule a call with me after 6 p.m. And then from 6 to 9, I am with family. So for me, Ann, it's making sure that I start my day strong. If I sleep in and I don't get those big rocks moved, it's really hard for me to get momentum up. So yeah, I would say having a very, very tight morning routine has been very, very impactful for me. And honestly, getting the stuff out of the way that you don't really want to do. I will not go to the gym tonight. I am a morning person. So yeah, that level of self-awareness too is super important.
I think that was my 80-20 too, my morning routine. I am feeling like the most confident person ever if I've woken up at 4:30 and I've knocked out 3 top priority tasks for the day by 8 a.m. I mean, it's done already. It's like amazing. And I recently started doing something called, not recently, actually like a year ago, what's called sleep to flow. So I went through Steve Kotler's flow class, Zero to Dangerous, and he actually have you wake up and straight to your desk, start working like right away. And then your breaks are the cold shower, the meditation, the workout. So you have like a 60 to 90 minute flow cycle, a break, and 60 to 90 minute flow cycle. So I've been able to achieve a month's worth of like slideshow review that I thought would take a month in one day.
That's awesome.
So that's the morning. Absolutely. It's amazing. Key. Yeah. And again, for other people, maybe it's night, right? I told Ann this, I said, after we do this, I'm going to hang out with my wife and we'll watch Christmas movies on the couch, maybe get some Indian food. I don't know. But for me, I like to have my nights for family and R&R. So maybe for you, you're a night owl. I am a morning owl for sure. And people may have different, what they call, I can't remember the term right now, but yes, you could be more productive at night and be more productive in the morning. But I also want to caution to not label yourself because I used to be a night person only and I would stay up till 4 a.m. And I always told myself I'm not a morning person. And all of a sudden, after like age 30, I'm a morning person.
No, that's good. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Labels. Be careful labels.
Yes, be careful of your labels. And if we talked about so much here, what would you say would be the one takeaway and one action that you want the audience to do right after this episode?
I would throw it to something that is simple but powerful. I would take out your cell phone, record a video to yourself about what you're dealing with in your life right now. What are you excited for? What are you proud of? What do you regret? What are you afraid of? Really just talk to yourself, interview yourself, and then check in with it in a month, and then check in with it a month later. You and I, Ann, have a very unique, distinctive opportunity where you can go back and listen to this whenever you want. That's going to help you become aware of how far you've come or how far you haven't. You can do the same thing if you're watching or listening, just record a video to yourself. I think that is a huge, huge practice with a lot of room for opportunity, and it will help you become self-aware because you're going to learn more about yourself than maybe anywhere else.
I've never heard that before. I'm going to do this after. That's amazing.
Well, you already do because you have the podcast. So I realize that for me, I'll go when I'm really high emotionally or really low emotionally, I reflect on our journey. And you want to talk about something that will show you it is the truth. Either I have gotten worse in fitness. I have. I'm not in as good a shape as I was a year ago. Business has grown exponentially. Abilities in speaking and podcasting have grown exponentially. When you reflect on an old you, that's the truth. I mean, that is awareness in a nutshell. So I think it's a wonderful exercise. Again, it can be painful and it can be a large dose of awareness. So make sure you take the right amount, but I do think it's valuable.
Yeah. And I think that's huge in terms of the concept of the gap and the gain. There was a book called The Gap and the Gain. And a lot of times we're suffering, we don't feel well because we're comparing ourselves to the future selves. Yep. And we are not where we want to be, in the future. And we forget where we've come back then, like from not making this much money to making like 100,000 and now making more than 100,000. But then now sometimes you get into the state where, well, I'm not making as much as those people who are making like 100 million. And so this is huge to go back to record the video of yourself. Think about where you are. Then in maybe a month or 3 months later, you can go back and kind of record the gains that you've had. You're comparing your current self to your past self, and you'll realize the successes that you've had. And the failures are not really failures. They're lessons to help you progress to where you want to go. And I do want to touch on also, there's peak performance planners as well on Amazon that you can get. And a lot of times they have prompts of questions too for the day, your daily goals, your top 3 priorities, and then the nightly reflections of what have you done well, what were you grateful for, etc. I think those for people who are looking for a tool, those are really good to use for daily self-introspective questions.
Well said, Anne. Well said.
All right. Thank you. I know we're short on time. So again, Kevin, this has been an amazing, amazing episode. We've unpacked a lot. And I think you've achieved the goal of adding value to our listeners. And just so people can find you, would you tell them your social media, your podcast coaching, and your website?
I always just say, listen to the podcast. That's where you'll learn the most about us. And honestly, if you liked what we talked about today, we talk about that a lot. If you're not sick of hearing my voice yet, cool. If you want to reach out for anything on social media, my name is Kevin Palmieri on LinkedIn and Facebook. And then on Instagram, my handle is @NeverQuitKid. So I am there. If you need anything, do not hesitate to reach out.
Awesome. Thank you. And just so everybody knows, the show notes here will be on itsnotrocketscience.com. And you can also reach me at tsungannmd@gmail.com if you have any questions, or just go on the website. It's Not Rocket Science Show. You can contact me there, subscribe, or reach out for a complimentary 60-minute coaching call. So again, thank you so much, Kevin, and everyone. Just remember that everything we need is within us now.
That's it for today's episode. Head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. One lucky listener every single week that posts a review in iTunes will win a chance in the grand prize drawing to win a private VIP day for a health and life makeover with Dr. Tsung herself. Then be sure to head on over to itsnotrocketscienceshow.com and pick up your free gift from Dr. Tsung. Then join us on the next episode.